I want to say up front that I am not a brave man. I am a man with a mortgage application sitting in underwriting and a wife 24 weeks pregnant. And those two facts made me polite for about 6 weeks longer than any self-respecting person should have been. My boss got into a lever's account, read every private message I had ever sent her about him, printed the parts he liked, and used them to sit me down and shut me up in front of my own team. 3 weeks after that, 3 trailers of frozen fish became an insurance claim in front of our biggest customer on a bank holiday Saturday, while a supermarket buyer watched a map full of nothing. The messages that finished it in the end were not mine. I work for a company that tracks refrigerated lorries. If you have ever wondered how a haulage firm knows that trailer number 61 left the depot at -20 and is still at -20 somewhere near Scotch Corner, it is because there is a little gray box bolted inside the trailer, and it talks to us, and we put it on a screen, and if the temperature starts creeping the wrong way, we wake somebody up. That is the entire business. 6 years I have done it. I know the sound a warehouse manager makes at 4 in the morning when he realizes he is about to lose 40,000 pounds of prawns, and I know that it is worth being woken up for. We are in a converted mill on a business park outside town, first floor, with a car park that floods and a kitchen that smells permanently of somebody's microwave fish, which we all found very funny for the first 2 years. Nell runs the testing and keeps a radio on the windowsill tuned to a station that plays nothing but songs from 1983. Yusuf sits opposite me and has never in his life closed a browser tab or a chat window, so his laptop looks like a car boot sale and takes 10 minutes to wake up. Carys handles the customers, which means Carys handles the shouting. It is not a glamorous place. I liked it a lot. My personal situation, because it matters to everything that follows. Ruth and I had an offer accepted in March on a small end terrace with a garden the size of a duvet, and by May the application was sitting with the underwriters waiting on one thing, which was a letter from my employer confirming my salary, my role, that I was permanent, and that I was not subject to any process. The pay rise I had been promised in April was baked into the numbers. Without it, the affordability did not work. So there was a piece of paper in the world that my boss had to sign, and he knew there was, because I had asked him about it twice in the kitchen while he was waiting for the kettle. His name was Clive, Director of Engineering, 48, Gilet in all weathers, and in my own head I called him the thermostat, because whatever room he walked into, he became the temperature of it. Bullish with the sales lot, wounded and thoughtful with the CEO, matey with us, and he called everybody chief, which after a while lands somewhere between affectionate and a warning. He had one physical habit I could spot from across the office. When he was about to say something that was not true, he took the lanyard round his neck and squared it up so the badge sat flat and faced outwards, like he was straightening a tie before a photograph. And here is the part one have to be fair about. In February, when Ruth had a bleed at 19 weeks, and we spent 2 nights on a ward not knowing anything, Clive took my on-call without being asked, told nobody why, and on the second evening turned up in the hospital car park with a flask of leek and potato soup and 2 plastic cups, and sat with me on the bonnet of his car for 40 minutes talking about absolutely nothing. He did not tell that story afterwards. He did not use it. For a while I thought that was the real him, and everything else was weather. The trouble started with Bethan leaving. Bethan had been with the company since the 2nd year, and she was the only person who properly understood the alerting, which is the part that decides whether a human being's phone rings. She had built most of it in a hurry in a bad winter, and then spent years quietly keeping it alive, and she was not precious about it. She just knew where all the string was tied. She resigned in April, worked her notice, and asked twice, in writing, for somebody to be given time to sit with her and write it all down. Nobody was given to her. Her last week was mostly exit forms and handing back a laptop, and on the Friday she went round with a tin of shortbread and left at 4, and the following Monday her desk had a monitor on it and nothing else. Nobody was hired. Nobody was even interviewed. Meanwhile, Clive had his project, which he called One Screen. Northmore Cold Freight, our biggest customer by a mile, was up for renewal and also pitching for a supermarket contract of their own, and Clive had promised their operations man Hugh a single live map with everything on it, trailers, temperatures, doors, the lot, in time for a demo in May. The demo was the whole world for about 2 months. There were countdowns on a whiteboard. The thing I kept saying, in meetings and out of them, was that the new screen did not do alerts. It showed you things beautifully if you were looking at it, and looking at it is a thing humans do between 8 and 6 on weekdays. The old alerting sat underneath, unglamorous, Bethan's string, and it phoned people in the night. Clive's plan, because drivers and depot managers had been complaining about false alarms, was to mute the old path and let the new screen handle warnings later, in what he called Phase 2. Now, I want to be precise, because this is the bit that mattered. Clive did not put that plan on the job list. He did it in a little chat with me and Yusuf, because Yusuf was on the on-call rota and had to know that the old alarms were going quiet, and because Clive liked keeping things where they could not be found by search. He wrote it out over about 3 days in the last week of April, in that chatty way he had, and when I read it back, I remember Yusuf leaning over, reading my screen, and saying, in a flat voice, that our friend had put all of that in writing, and did I understand what a gift that was. I said something like, "He is not going to lie about it," and Yusuf laughed and turned back to his own machine and left the chat window open, the way he leaves everything open. I also, and this is the stupid part, vented about it. Bethan and I had a private thread going back years, most of it rubbish, half of it about her allotment, and in the weeks before she left I said things in it I would not want read out. I said that Clive did not know what a temperature probe was. I said that if he shipped one screen and muted the old alarms, the trailers would go dark and nobody would notice until something rotted. I said, and this is the one that came back to haunt me hardest, that he was managing his own reflection. 9 days after Bethan left, Clive asked me for 15 minutes in the room we called Drift and put a printed stack of paper face down on the table between us. He started warm. He always started warm. He said he wanted to clear the air before the demo because he did not like an atmosphere, and that he needed to know I was on the bus. I said I was on the bus. I just thought the bus had no brakes, which I was quite pleased with at the time. Then he turned the stack over, and it was my messages, 30-odd pages of them, printed out with the good bits highlighted in green, and I felt my whole face go hot before I even understood what I was looking at. He read them to me. That is the thing I cannot get past even now, the reading. He put his glasses on, and he did it slowly, in a mild, disappointed voice, like a man going through a child's report card. He read the temperature probe one. He read the one about his reflection, and he paused after it and looked up at me over the frames and asked if I thought that was a professional way to describe a colleague. He read a message where I had said the demo would be a triumph of nothing, and then he read Bethan's reply, which had been 3 laughing faces and a rude word, and he said, "Is that funny, Chief? Because I am not laughing." I asked him how he had them. He said, entirely calmly, that he had needed to retrieve Bethan's handover notes from her account, and that in the course of that he had found material of concern. In the course of that, he said the word account like it was a filing cabinet in a corridor and not a woman's private conversations. He said he had not shared them with anybody, and while he said it he took his lanyard and squared it up so the badge lay flat, and I remember thinking, clear as a bell, well, there it is. I had both hands flat on the table by then, pressing down, because they wanted to do something else. I said that a private message is not a work product, and he knew it. I said that if he had concerns about my view of one screen, he could have had them in a meeting like a grown man, since I had made my view public roughly 11 times. And he said, and I have thought about this sentence probably 1,000 times since, he said, "Ivor, let's keep this grown up. Nobody is being disciplined. But you will understand that if I am being asked to put my name to a letter about your conduct and your standing here, for a bank, it does concentrate the mind a bit." That is how he did it. Not a threat. Nothing you could write down and take to anybody. Just my mortgage, sitting there on the table next to my own words about his reflection, and a small patient smile, and then a change of subject to whether I would front the technical part of the demo, because Hugh trusts your face. "Chief, you have a very honest face." I said yes. I want to be honest that I said yes, and that I said it quickly. Ruth was 22 weeks. We had a completion date penciled for July and a fridge covered in scanned photos and a spreadsheet of what we could afford if the rise came through, which was not much, but it was a garden. I sat in that room and did the sums in about 4 seconds and said yes. And then I went to the toilet and stood in a cubicle with my jaw clenched so hard my ears rang. Yusuf found me in the car park at 5:30. He did not ask what happened. He just said that Clive had been walking about all afternoon with a stack of printouts under his arm like a man carrying a trophy through a pub, and that Nell had asked him what they were, and he had said, "Personnel matter," and tapped the paper. She had rolled her eyes so hard I am amazed she found them again. Yusuf said, and then he asked me if I was all right, and I said no. And he said, right. And we stood there for a bit not saying anything, which is a thing men do instead of talking, and it did help slightly. The group chat, the one without Clive in it, went absolutely feral that night. Carys wanted to know if it was even legal to read a leaver's messages, and Nell said legal is not the same as normal, and that she had personally been on the receiving end of one screen for 2 months and would be checking her own conversation history for anything about a man in a gilet. Sam, who had started 3 days earlier and had a photograph of a whippet as his profile picture, sent a single question mark, and Yusuf replied, "Mate, do not worry about it. Learn the map," and Sam sent a thumbs up, and I lay in bed at 1 in the morning reading it all and feeling like I had let every one of them down by saying yes. Then, for 2 weeks, everything was fine, and that was worse. The demo went beautifully. Hugh came over with 2 of his people and sat in the big room with the good chairs, and Clive had bought pastries, actual nice ones from the place in town, and the new screen was, I have to say it, gorgeous. Everything on one map, trailers as little colored pips, temperatures in a strip down the side, a satisfying tick when a door closed. Hugh laughed out loud when he found his own lorry in a lay by near Kindle. Clive was magnificent. He remembered that Hugh's daughter had just done her exams and asked about them by name. And when Hugh pushed on price he did not oversell. He said, quite quietly, "Look at it for a month before you decide." And Hugh liked that so much he signed a renewal in principle before he had finished his coffee. I did the technical part, and Clive stood at the back and let me have it, and afterwards he said, in front of Carys, that I had been the best thing in the room. In the all-hands that Thursday, there was actual applause. There was pizza on the Friday. He came over to my desk with a paper plate in his hand and said he knew we had had a moment, Chief, and that he had been under it, and did I still need that letter, and I said yes, and he printed it, signed it, and had it couriered to the broker himself. I watched him do it. He put a compliment about me in the second paragraph that I had not asked for. So I sat there for a fortnight in a state I can only describe as grudging peace. Maybe he had read those messages and been genuinely hurt, and maybe hurt men do stupid heavy-handed things and then try to put them right with a signature and a pizza. Maybe muting the old alarms was fine, and I was a small man who liked being right about breaks. Nell asked me one lunchtime whether I had forgiven him, and I said I had decided not to think about it. And she said that is not the same thing, and went back to her sandwich. The road of that fortnight was Yusuf, then me. In 14 nights my phone did not go off once. It was the quietest on-call weekend of my life. Carys rang me at 20 to 10 on the Saturday morning of the bank holiday. I was in the garden center with Ruth looking at a bench we could not afford, and I stepped away into the aisle with the compost, and Carys was doing the thing where she keeps her voice completely level, and it is somehow much worse. She said Hugh had rung the office line, which nobody rings on a Saturday, and then rung her mobile, and that Northmore had 3 trailers that had not reported since Thursday evening. Not warm, not warning, nothing. And that Hugh was standing in a meeting room in Warrington with 2 people from a supermarket, showing them our lovely map as part of his own pitch, and the map was gray. Gray. All of them gray. I got in the car and drove to the mill in shorts. Yusuf was already there, in a football kit, because he had been at his son's tournament and had come straight from the touchline. And he had 4 windows open and that particular stillness he gets. The first thing he said was that the boxes were fine, they had been talking to us the whole time, and that the trailers were not dark at all. What was dark was us. The strip down the side of the new screen had been showing stale numbers for 2 weeks, and nobody had noticed, because a stale number looks exactly like a fine number if nobody is due to be woken up. The 3 trailers had been sat in a yard since Thursday with a fault on a fridge unit and had come up steadily to +6, and there was salmon in 2 of them and a load of ice cream in the 3rd. We tried to turn the old alarms back on. That was attempt 1, and it took 11 minutes to establish that we could not, because the old path ran under Bethan's login and Bethan's login had been closed on the Friday she left, as HR had correctly instructed, and nobody, anywhere, had the details for what sat underneath it. Nobody had been hired to have them. Yusuf just sat back and put both hands on top of his head. Attempt 2 was the shared folder with her notes in it. The folder was there. About a third of it was written. The rest was headings, and one of the headings just said, in Bethan's flat way, things nobody has been given time to write down yet. Attempt 3 was ringing her. I did not want to. I did it in the stairwell with the door shut, and she answered on the third go, and she was in a car park somewhere with her mom, and she was completely lovely about it, which made it worse. She said, Ivor, I am sorry, I have nothing. They walked me out on the Friday with my lanyard in a canvas bag. She said she was not going to talk me through 4 years of it down the phone on a bank holiday, and that she had asked, twice, and that she had also said in a meeting in February that the new screen and the old alarms had never once spoken to each other and never would unless somebody sat down and made them. Then she said, is anybody in that building actually looking after you? And I said no, and she said, get out, and hung up. Meanwhile, the office was filling up, one person at a time, on a bank holiday Saturday, nobody having been called. Nell arrived at 11:30 with her son, who sat up with a tablet and a bag of Haribo at the empty desk that used to be Bethan's, which I found unbearable and said nothing about. Carys came in because taking that many phone calls in her kitchen with her kids there had become impossible. Sam turned up at 12 because he had seen the group chat and did not yet know that you are allowed to not come in. And he stood in the doorway with a bike helmet in his hand saying, is there something I can do? And Nell put him on the phones with a list. Because that was the recovery in the end. Not clever. We printed a list of every trailer Northmore had out, 71 of them, and we sat in a room and rang depots and drivers and yard managers one at a time and asked a human being to go and look at a dial, and Sam read numbers out, and Carys dialed, and Nell wrote the readings on a whiteboard in 3 colors, and Yusuf worked out which ones were lying to us. It took until 9 at night. 6 other trailers had been sat on stale numbers, and 2 of those were borderline. The 3 in the yard were gone. Written off on the spot, in front of a supermarket buyer, in the middle of Hugh's pitch. Carys took the 4th call from the yard manager in Warrington, the one where he stopped being angry and started being upset because it was his name on the load, and afterwards she went into the kitchen and shut the door and cried standing up with her back to the fridge, and when Nell went in she waved her off and said she was fine and she was just going to have a minute. Clive arrived at 1:10. He came up the stairs slowly and stood at the end of the desks in a fleece with dried fence paint down one sleeve, and his face was the color of putty, and for a good 5 seconds he did not say anything at all. Then he said, right, and then he said, Chief, talk me through it, and I did, and he kept saying, but the screen was green, the screen has been green, and every time he said it I could feel Yusuf not looking at me. At about 2 he made a phone call to Hugh from the meeting room with the door shut, and we could hear the shape of it through the glass, the long silences on our side. And when he came out he went and stood by the window with his back to the room for a while. And then he asked Nell where the tea bags had moved to. That was the last normal thing he said to any of us. Tuesday morning, because Monday was the holiday and nobody was going to have this conversation on a holiday. Deirdre, our CEO, drove down from her place in the hills and was in the building before 8. And at 9 she asked for everybody who had been in on Saturday to come into the room we call Tundra, and she asked Clive to come too. 7 of us round a table built for 6. Sam stood by the door with his back against the wall like a man waiting for a bus he was not sure about. Deirdre is not a shouter. She sat with a letter from Northmore in front of her, face down, and she said, I would like somebody to tell me what happened. Clive went first, and he went for 20 minutes. He was good, I will give him that. He talked about the departure of a key colleague and the risk of a single person holding critical knowledge, about how he had inherited a fragile arrangement built years ago by somebody who had documented almost none of it, and how he had flagged that risk, and how the handover had been, and he said this word twice, inadequate. He said what happened on Saturday was the predictable consequence of that fragility. He said the word fragility about 6 times, and it started to sound like a room in a museum. Deirdre listened all the way through. Then she asked, who decided that the old alarms would be switched off? And Clive said it was not switched off, it was staged, and that staging had been discussed by the team, and that the team had raised no formal objection. That was round 2. Then he said, and this is where he reached down beside his chair, that he thought Deirdre should also understand the culture he had been managing, and he brought the printed stack up onto the table, the green highlighter, and he said that for months a member of this team had been writing contemptuous things about him in private while sitting on concerns he never brought to anybody. And he began to read the one about his reflection out loud to the CEO of our company. I heard my own voice say his name, and it came out shaky, and I hated that. Yusuf said, sorry, could I read something out? He had his laptop with him because Yusuf always has his laptop with him, that battered one with the wobbly hinge and the sticker of a Highland cow on the lid, and he opened it and turned it round so it faced the middle of the table, and he scrolled up for a long time with everybody watching him do it, and then he read it flat, like a man reading out a train timetable, with the dates. 29th of April. Mute the old alarms this week, please. Do not want them firing during Northmore testing. 29th of April. Do not put it on the job list, Chief. It will get picked up in the review and I cannot be doing with the theater. 30th of April. Alerting on the new screen is phase 2. After the demo, no point promising it twice. 1st of May, and Yusuf read this one twice, once quickly and once slowly. If Deirdre asks, alerting is unchanged. And then, from the same afternoon, I will take the heat if it bites us. Nobody said anything. The radio was on out on the floor, faintly, through the door. Clive's hand went up towards his lanyard and stopped about halfway, in the air, and stayed there. Deirdre asked him, "Did you write that?" And he said, "Deirdre, I," and his voice went on her name, cracked right through the middle of it like a boy's, and he did not finish the sentence. She sent him out, not to his desk. She was specific about that in front of all of us. She said he was not to go back to his desk, and then she said to the rest of the room that she would be writing to Hugh herself that morning, and that she wanted the 71 trailers checked by hand every day until she was told otherwise. He was gone from the building by 10:30. Somebody from IT stood next to him while he got his cycling shoes out of a drawer, and the all-hands on Thursday was one sentence. "Clive has left the business. I will be running engineering myself until I find somebody. Ask me anything you like." Nell asked whether anybody was going to replace Bethan. Deirdre said yes, 2 of her, and she meant it. They started in July. When the room emptied, she asked me to stay, and she asked what she could do about the position he had put me in, and I told her about the letter, and about the underwriters, and about the fact that I had spent 3 weeks knowing exactly what was going to happen and saying yes anyway because of a house. She did not tell me that was fine. She said, "No, that is a thing I need to fix in this company." And then she went and stood in the doorway and asked HR to reissue it that afternoon over her own signature, with the rise in it. The underwriters came back on the 9th with 2 lines and no questions. We completed in July, for days before Ruth stopped being able to see her own feet. The scan photo went on the new fridge under a magnet shaped like a strawberry, and the first night my phone went off at 3 in the morning about a trailer near Carlisle. I sat on the stairs in the dark and was glad to hear it.